Have you ever stumbled across a story that feels too strange, too mysterious, and yet somehow too important to ignore? That's what happens when you open the pages of the Book of Enoch. It's a book that almost made it into the Bible, but didn't. A book that some early Christians quoted, while others wanted to hide away. And the more you look into it, the more you start to wonder, what truths were people afraid of? What secrets about giants, angels, and the very nature of evil does this book hold? Let's be honest. When most of us think about the Bible, we think of the 66 books we've grown familiar with. But the truth is, there were other writings in circulation during biblical times. Texts that people read, debated, and sometimes even revered. The Book of Enoch is one of the most fascinating among them. And while it didn't end up in the official canon, it continues to whisper questions across history. So today, let's walk together through the world of Enoch, not just to repeat ancient words, but to ask, why does this mysterious book matter so much today? And what does it reveal about the hidden forces shaping humanity's darkest chapters? Who was Enoch? More than just a name in Genesis. Before we dive into fallen angels and giants, we need to talk about the man himself. Enoch in Genesis is described in just a few lines. It says, he walked with God, and then he was no more, because God took him. That's it. Unlike most people in Genesis who are remembered for living hundreds of years and then dying, Enoch simply disappears, taken straight into God's presence without death. That alone sets him apart. Imagine being so close to God that death itself doesn't touch you. The ancient world found this detail fascinating. To them, Enoch wasn't just a righteous man, he was a bridge between heaven and earth, a figure who saw the unseen and carried divine secrets. The Book of Enoch builds on that idea, turning him into a prophet who journeys into heaven, witnesses the fate of angels, and even foretells the coming judgment. But here's the big question. If Enoch's writings were so important, why were they left out of the Bible? The mystery of exclusion. Why was Enoch left out? Scholars suggest a mix of reasons. Some doubted whether Enoch actually wrote it. Others feared its content, stories of angels falling from heaven, forbidden knowledge being taught to humans, and giants roaming the earth. That's not exactly Sunday school material. And yet, the book of Jude in the New Testament actually quotes Enoch directly, which means early Christians did see it as valuable, at least in part. To put it simply, the Book of Enoch sits in this gray space, not fully scripture, but not completely ignored either. It's like a book people didn't want to fully erase, but also didn't want to officially endorse. And that makes it even more intriguing for us today. The Watchers, angels who fell. Here's where the story takes a dark turn. According to Enoch, certain angels called the Watchers were sent to oversee humanity. But instead of guiding people toward God, they fell into temptation. They took human wives, and from those unions came children unlike anything the world had ever seen, the Nephilim. Giants who brought violence and corruption across the earth. But that wasn't all. These fallen angels also gave humans forbidden knowledge, teaching sorcery, astrology, weapon making, and even the art of cosmetics. At first glance, that last one may seem harmless, but in the ancient worldview, even beauty could be twisted into a weapon of corruption. The point was this: knowledge in the wrong hands destroys. And according to Enoch, that's exactly what happened. The world spiraled into chaos. If you stop and think about it, this story echoes something very human. Haven't we seen time and time again how knowledge, while powerful, can lead to destruction if misused? From nuclear technology to artificial intelligence, humanity often wrestles with the same question. Just because we can, should we? The story of the Watchers forces us to confront that reality. Let me pause here and share a quick story. Years ago, I came across an interview with a scientist who worked on nuclear weapons. He said that when they first cracked the math to split the atom, the mood in the room was half excitement, half dread. They realized they had just opened a door that could either fuel humanity for generations or destroy it in a flash. That moment, in many ways, feels like the modern echo of the Watcher's tale. Knowledge itself isn't the enemy, but what humans do with it, that's where the danger lies. And the Book of Enoch seems to be warning us. When divine boundaries are crossed, chaos follows. The Nephilim, giants lost in time. Now, let's talk about the Nephilim, because this is where things get truly bizarre. Described as giants, they weren't just tall people, they were violent, destructive, and corrupting the natural order. Genesis 6 mentions them briefly. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took them as wives. The result? The Nephilim. Here's where it gets interesting. Legends of giants exist in nearly every culture, from the Greek Titans to the Sumerian demigods, from Norse frost giants to Native American stories of massive beings walking the earth. Could the Nephilim be the root of those myths? Or are these stories simply humanity's way of wrestling with the unknown? Modern theories abound. Some suggest UFOs, others point to ancient alien encounters or lost technologies. While many of these ideas live on the fringe, they highlight one thing. People sense that the story of humanity is bigger than what we see on the surface. Why the Book of Enoch still speaks. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, so the Book of Enoch is strange and mysterious, but why should I care about it today? That's a fair question. Here's my take. The Book of Enoch reminds us that the unseen world is real. It warns us that rebellion, whether angelic or human, leads to destruction, and it forces us to wrestle with the reality that not all knowledge is meant for us. And maybe that's the greatest lesson here. Boundaries aren't chains. Sometimes they're safeguards. Just like a parent sets limits for a child, God set limits for angels and humans alike. When those limits are ignored, the consequences are devastating. So as we wrap up this first part, let's reflect. The Book of Enoch isn't just about giants or fallen angels. It's about a world unraveling because people and spiritual beings alike refused to respect the boundaries set by God. It's about the dangers of chasing knowledge without wisdom. And maybe that's about us today, living in a world where technology, power, and ambition push us closer to those same dangers. In part 2, we'll dive deeper into Enoch's visions, journeys into heaven, glimpses of Judgment Day, and the surprising ways his writings connect with the Book of Revelation. You won't want to miss it. In part 1, we explored who Enoch was, why his writings were controversial, and how the Watchers and the Nephilim shook the foundations of the ancient world. But the Book of Enoch doesn't stop at telling us how things went wrong. It also gives us a breathtaking look upward into heaven itself. Enoch becomes not just a messenger, but a witness of things most of us could never even imagine. So let's step into his visions together. But remember, these aren't just strange symbolic pictures. They're warnings, promises, and echoes of truths that still reach into our lives today. Enoch's heavenly journey. The Book of Enoch describes how Enoch was taken on a tour of the heavens. Imagine being lifted beyond the earth, beyond the stars, into a place where the fabric of reality itself feels alive with God's presence. Enoch claims to have seen the throne of God,
surrounded by angels so radiant and powerful that human language couldn't capture their glory. It's hard not to think of John in the Book of Revelation, who centuries later would write about seeing a similar throne, blazing with light, surrounded by creatures singing, "Holy, holy, holy." The parallel is striking. Both men, Enoch and John, seem to suggest that heaven isn't far away. It's closer than we realize, and its reality is overwhelming. But Enoch didn't just see beauty, he saw judgment. The fate of the Watchers. One of the chilling parts of Enoch's visions is the judgment pronounced on the fallen angels, the Watchers. These were beings who had once stood in God's presence but chose rebellion. In Enoch's vision, they are bound in chains, awaiting a final judgment. Think about that. Beings of immense power who once shaped the course of humanity, now shackled and waiting? It's a picture of ultimate accountability. No matter how high someone rises or how powerful they seem, no one escapes God's justice. It reminds me of a real-world story from history. After World War II, at the Nuremberg trials, some of the most powerful leaders in the world were put on trial for crimes against humanity. People who thought they were untouchable suddenly had to face judgment. That moment shook the world because it proved that even the mighty can fall. Enoch's vision carries the same weight. The Watchers, who corrupted humanity with forbidden knowledge, will answer for it. And it's a reminder for us. Power without accountability always leads to ruin. Prophecies of judgment on earth. Enoch doesn't stop at angels. He describes visions of coming judgment on the earth itself, floods, fire, and cosmic upheavals. Some passages almost sound like previews of the flood in Noah's day. Others sound eerily similar to the end-time judgments described in Revelation, where the sun darkens, the stars fall, and nations tremble. Now, whether you believe these are literal events, symbolic warnings, or both, the message is clear. Injustice doesn't last forever. Corruption may rise, but it won't win. Evil may seem unstoppable, but it's already on borrowed time. And here's something interesting. When you look at history, every empire that seemed unstoppable eventually fell. Babylon, Rome, the great powers of the Middle Ages, all of them collapsed under the weight of their own corruption. Could it be that Enoch's visions were less about predicting dates and more about showing us this universal pattern? That when people or powers turn away from God's order, they inevitably crumble? Echoes of Revelation. It's impossible to read Enoch and not notice how much of it sounds like Revelation. Both books describe heavenly visions, angelic messengers, cosmic battles, and final judgment. Some scholars even suggest that John, the writer of Revelation, may have been influenced by the imagery in Enoch. But here's the key difference. Where Enoch leaves us with judgment, Revelation points us to hope. It reminds us that after the darkness, there will be a new heaven and a new earth. Together, these two books feel like two sides of the same coin: judgment and redemption, warning and promise. And if you've ever felt like the world is spiraling out of control, these visions remind us history isn't random. There's a plan, even if we can't see all of it yet. Real-life parallel, signs of warning. Let me share a modern parallel that might help this sink in. Do you remember the financial crash of 2008? Economists later admitted that the warning signs had been there for years. Reckless lending, inflated housing markets, risky bets by banks. But most people ignored them. Then suddenly the entire system came crashing down. In a way, prophecy works like those warnings. It doesn't always tell us exactly when or how things will collapse, but it shows us the patterns, the dangers, the signs of trouble ahead. Enoch's visions function in the same way. They're flashing red lights, telling us that corruption, arrogance, and rebellion carry a price tag. The role of angels in judgment. Another striking detail in Enoch is the role of angels. They're not just bystanders, they act as agents of God's judgment and mercy. Some carry messages, others carry out sentences, and some protect the righteous. It makes you wonder how much of the spiritual realm is involved in the events we see every day. The Bible often describes angels as working behind the scenes in history. And if Enoch's visions are accurate, then every major turning point in human history isn't just political, it's spiritual too. Personal reflection. Accountability in our lives. Now let's pull this down to a personal level. It's easy to talk about fallen angels and nations under judgment, but what about us? The truth is we all carry responsibility for how we use our influence, our knowledge, our power, no matter how big or small. Think about it. In your family, at your job, even online, what are you building? Something that honors God or something that corrupts? The Watchers remind us of what happens when power is abused. Enoch reminds us that all of us, one day, will answer for how we lived. And maybe that's the point. Prophecy isn't just about predicting the future. It's about shaping the present. It's a call to live differently now, because tomorrow is never guaranteed. So as we wrap up part 2, let's recap. Enoch's visions pull back the curtain on heaven and judgment. They remind us that no power is beyond God's reach, no injustice escapes his notice, and no rebellion goes unanswered. They show us that prophecy is less about guessing the future and more about preparing our hearts today. In part 3, we'll explore how the Book of Enoch points toward hope, redemption, and even connects to the coming of the Messiah. We'll also look at how its themes continue to shape debates about angels, demons, and the unseen battle we still face. Stay with me, it's about to get even more powerful. We've walked through the shadows of Enoch's writings, fallen angels, giants, judgment, and visions of heaven that shook the ancient world. But the story doesn't end in darkness. At its core, the Book of Enoch is not just about doom, it's about hope. It points forward beyond judgment to redemption. And that's what we'll uncover in this final part, the hope Enoch hints at, the echoes of the Messiah, and what all of this means for us right now. The promise of the righteous one. One of the most fascinating sections in the Book of Enoch speaks of a figure called the Son of Man, or the Elect One. This person is described as chosen by God, exalted, and seated on a throne of glory. His role is to bring justice, to crush evil, and to vindicate the righteous. Does that sound familiar? It should. The language mirrors what we later see in the Gospels when Jesus calls himself the Son of Man. Many scholars believe Enoch's writings laid the groundwork for this title. Now, whether you believe Enoch was directly predicting Jesus or simply pointing to a pattern, the connection is hard to ignore. It's as if Enoch's vision was a preview, a shadow cast on the wall of a greater reality that would come centuries later in Christ. Redemption beyond judgment. Here's the part we often miss. Prophecy isn't meant to scare us, it's meant to prepare us. Enoch describes terrible judgments, yes, but he also describes the joy of the righteous, a world restored, and a creation at peace. It reminds me of the way a storm clears the air. If you've ever lived through a hurricane or tornado, you know the chaos it brings. But afterward, the skies often look clearer, the air fresher, as if the world itself is breathing again. That's what Enoch's visions of judgment feel like. Not the end of everything, but the clearing of corruption to make way for renewal. Modern connection. Prophecy as a compass. I think it helps to see prophecy like a compass, not a calendar. Too often people try to use prophecy to set dates or make predictions. But Enoch's book seems less interested in telling us when and more focused on reminding us why. Take the Cold War, for example. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world came terrifyingly close to nuclear war. People thought it might be the end of the world. Churches were packed, and talk of prophecy skyrocketed. But what did we learn afterward? That the crisis wasn't the end, but it was a warning. It showed us how fragile peace can be, and how easily human pride can tip us into destruction. In the same way, Enoch's visions remind us, don't get lost in dates, look at direction. Which way is your life pointing? Which way is humanity heading? Prophecy is God's compass, nudging us back when we drift. The ongoing debate.
Why Enoch matters today. Now here's a question you might be wondering. If Enoch is so powerful, why isn't it in the Bible? The truth is, the Book of Enoch was widely read in the centuries before Jesus. It was quoted in early Christian writings and even directly referenced in the New Testament book of Jude. But over time, church leaders debated its authenticity and chose not to include it in the final biblical canon. Yet its influence never went away. You still find echoes of its language in Christian, Jewish, and even Islamic traditions. Some see it as dangerous, others as enlightening. But one thing is clear: it refuses to be forgotten. And maybe that's the point. The Book of Enoch sits on the edge of Scripture, like a voice just outside the door, reminding us that there's always more to the story than we can see. Personal reflection: living as if the future matters. So what do we do with all of this? Giants, angels, visions, judgment. It can feel overwhelming. But maybe the most practical takeaway is this: live today as if tomorrow matters. Think about it. Enoch didn't just see visions. He lived in a way that pleased God so much that he was taken without experiencing death. His life itself became a testimony. And that's the challenge for us. It's not just about decoding prophecy. It's about embodying faith, justice, and hope right here, right now. Let me share a quick story. A few years ago, I met a man who had spent decades working with refugees. He didn't talk much about prophecy, but his life was prophetic in its own way. By caring for the displaced, he embodied the hope of a better world, the same hope Enoch pointed toward. That stuck with me. Sometimes prophecy isn't just about what we say, it's about how we live. So here's the takeaway. The Book of Enoch may be mysterious, controversial, and unsettling at times, but it carries a timeless message. Evil will not last forever. Judgment is real, but so is redemption. The Son of Man, whether seen in Enoch's visions or fulfilled in Jesus, reminds us that history is moving toward justice, renewal, and peace. And maybe that's what we need most in our troubling times. Not a timeline, not a date, but a reminder that no matter how dark things get, hope is always on the horizon. Thank you for walking with me through the mysteries of the Book of Enoch. We've uncovered fallen angels, giants, judgment, and visions of heaven that shook the ancient world. And through it all, the glimmer of redemption that never fades. So as you turn off this video tonight, I want you to carry one thought. Prophecy isn't about escaping the world, it's about engaging it with hope. It's about living as if your choices matter, because they do. And maybe, just maybe, the ancient words of Enoch are still whispering to us today. Live ready, because history is moving toward hope.